Hey, have you ever wondered how the countries of France, Belgium, Luxembourg and the Netherlands were liberated, and how the Western Allies took control over the western part of Germany? Well, this video is for you. I'm gonna present you a full overview of the liberation of France and the Benelux countries, as well as the Allied takeover of the western part of Germany, the end of World War II in Europe, the Western Front. Stay tuned. On the 6th of June 1944, the Allies undertook the biggest landing operation in history, Operation Overlord. This operation consisted of 175,000 men were about to set ashore on the beaches of Normandy, France. Around 80 kilometers of coastline was divided in 5 zones. Utah and Omaha for the Americans, Gold and Sword for the British, and Juno for the Canadians. Canada was back then still part of the British Empire. Allied paratroopers were to be dropped behind enemy lines, and the French resistance took its part in sabotaging the French railway network. However, because of bad weather, the ship's naval guns, as well as aerial bombing planes, weren't able to destroy the obstacles from the beaches. Also, many Sherman tanks that were dropped near the beaches in the water didn't manage to get on land. At Utah Beach, the US 4th Infantry Division made it ashore with fewer than 200 deadly casualties and moved inland to link up with the paratroopers. On Omaha Beach, the attackers of the 1st and 29th Infantry Division had a very hard time. The Allied bombing had largely missed its targets, and therefore the Americans that set ashore at Omaha Beach were met by a hail of German machine gun bullets. Also, many landing crafts got stuck in the sand dunes, so therefore American troops had to hop out of their boats in order to make it ashore. Some of them drowned, and others were basically sitting ducks in the water, which severely slowed them down. Yet, one company managed to find a crack in the German defenses, and with help of naval guns as well, with the very few tanks that got ashore, they managed to break through. On Gold Beach, the British 50th Division managed to get ashore successfully without too much casualties. Their Canadian comrades of the Canadian 3rd Division had a much harder time on Juno Beach. Here the Germans had fortified seaside villages and above all a network of tunnels. The British 3rd Division had a tough time as well on Sword Beach. This was because of the high tide, artillery fire and the large German bunker complex that was located there. Yet, the 6th Airborne Division had managed to blow up the bridges in the hinterland that prevented German reinforcements. The Allies had now successfully managed to establish a bridgehead on Normandy. However, the battle for Normandy, let alone the battle for France, was far from over. German generals argued that if the Allies weren't pushed back into the sea, the battle would be lost. Caen was a major city located near Sword Beach. Aerial bombing had largely flattened the city and also killed 300 French civilians. Because of this, the Germans were alerted and they moved in. Fighting for the Allies proved to be very difficult in the rubble of the city, and it took them over 1 month to capture Caen. The 12th Ss Panzer Division, Hitlerjugend, fought extremely fanatical. Its leaders said to its soldiers that those who surrendered showed signs of treachery, and therefore these men fought till the bitter end. Once captured, some of these fanatical SS members refused blood transfusions. They did not want foreign blood, and above all, they wanted to die for their Führer. So understand here that the whole assertion of the Allies only encountering low morale Germans simply is not true. Further west, the Allies fought for Cotentin, Cherbourg and Saint-Lô. Do understand that however the Germans there were outnumbered, they proved to be a tough opponent because some of these men had experience from the Eastern Front. Rommel and Rundstedt asked Hitler on 17 June for permission to withdraw their forces to a more defensible line behind the river Orne and beyond the range of Allied naval guns. Hitler, on a brief visit to France to impose his will on his generals, refused to consider anything of the sort. It was this manic obstinacy and interference in command decisions which decided not just the pattern of the Normandy campaign, but the fate of the whole of France. Over the course of the summer, the Germans managed to keep the Allies stuck at Normandy with the bulk of their panzer units. At the end of July 1944, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, which proved successful because they broke out of Normandy. Also, at that time, the Germans encountered a severe defeat at the Eastern Front during Operation Bagration. Because of this breakthrough, the German 7th Army became surrounded at Falaise. This pocket held out for over a week. When it was dissolved, the road to Paris laid open. On August 19th, Free French commander Charles de Gaulle met with Supreme Commander Eisenhower. De Gaulle insisted to march on Paris as soon as possible. The French resistance was already planning an uprising. De Gaulle was afraid that the communists among them would take power, so he wanted to move in with his forces to prevent that from happening. The Paris insurrection had already started. German commander Dietrich von Scheldt was ordered by Hitler to destroy the city, but he lacked the will nor the means to do so. Severe skirmishes between German and French resistance took place for several days. On August 25th, the Allies entered the city. Paris was spared from total destruction. The French resistance sprung up after the French defeat of 1940, where the French commander Charles de Gaulle encouraged the French to resist against its occupier. Resistance varied from spreading anti-German newspapers, broadcasting radio programs, as well as armed resistance like assassination attempts. The resistance members came from different classes of French society and had different ideologies. Some supported de Gaulle, others were communists or anarchists. Yet they were united by one goal. They were supplied and sometimes trained by the British and American intelligence services. After the Normandy breakout, they helped liberating town after town and took a substantial role in the liberation of Paris. In the meanwhile, Polish, Free French and Dutch forces were set ashore on Normandy to help with the liberation of Western Europe. The advance after the Normandy breakout went so swift that the Allies ran into supply problems. For this, they set up the Red Ball Express, which was a truck convoy system to supply their advance. And another aspect that attributed to the swift liberation of France was Operation Dragoon. An operation that is not very well known is Operation Dragoon, which was launched mid-August. Over 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on the Côte d'Azur between Marseille and Nice. It speeded up the German retreat from France. It therefore also limited the damage in France, although this of course did not apply for the cities and towns in Normandy. Many of these were reduced to ashes. Although France was liberated in 1944, some German pockets held out till 1944. On the Atlantic coastline, there were German fortified places that held out till May 1945. Because of the rapid Allied advance, many people thought and wished the war to end before Christmas. But that's a thing with war, that whenever you think or say it might be over before Christmas, it probably won't. Initially, the Allies managed to keep their momentum as they marched into Belgium. On September 2nd, 1944, the 1st Allied troops, the 2nd Canadian Division, entered Belgium. And one day later, the capital of Brussels was liberated. The Belgian people were pleasantly surprised. They didn't expect their city to be liberated so soon. For them, the war was definitely over before Christmas. The following day, Antwerp was liberated. Near Mons, retreating Germans got into fighting with American troops, which left 2,000 dead and 30,000 captured. Some of these troops had committed atrocities to the local population in response to recent attacks by the Belgian resistance. Polish troops secured the Ghent Canal and Canadians liberated Bruges. Most of Belgium was liberated in October 1944. On the 10th of September, Luxembourg City, the capital of Luxembourg, was also liberated. Now, mid-September, a battle took place further up north towards the German border in the Luxembourgish town of Vianden, which is known as the Battle of Vianden Castle, between Waffen-SS troops and the Luxembourgish resistance. Mid-November, a German patrol marched into the town and was ambushed by the Luxembourgish resistance fighters, which left a couple of Germans dead and they retreated. But then, later, SS troops returned. Now, the resistance had ordered the civilian evacuation to leave the town, and they themselves decided to make a stand. And so they did. Greatly outnumbered, they fought against the Germans, who did not manage to take the castle and therefore tried to take the town instead. Heavy fighting followed, which left several Germans dead, after which they retreated across the river back into Germany. The Luxembourgish resistance had only one deadly casualty and a few wounded. It seemed like the Allies were able to push for their first German city, the city of Aachen. Because of the chaotic German retreat, it seemed that the German army at the Western Front was on the point of collapse. But then, German General Walter Model managed to restore order, and it was more than clear that the Germans were everything but defeated. Now, in the previous video I mentioned how the Allies ran into supply problems in France, and they tackled this by setting up Operation Red Ball Express, which was a truck convoy system to supply their troops. In Belgium they had similar problems, and they tackled this with the ABC Express in order to keep the momentum going. Early that month, the Belgian cities of Brussels and Antwerp were liberated by the Allies, and many people in the Netherlands believed that they would soon be liberated as well. Therefore, they started to celebrate prematurely. This day, the 5th of September, is also known as Mad Tuesday or Dolle Dinsdag. Even the Germans believed it. Rumors spread that Breda was already liberated, which wasn't the case, and the Germans in many occasions withdrew from their posts, but soon found out that the Allies weren't moving in because the Allies had reached the end of their capabilities. Therefore, the occupation of the Netherlands lasted longer, and this had devastating results. Maastricht, located all the way in the south of the Netherlands, was the first Dutch city to be liberated by the Allies in September 1944, and shortly after, the Allies launched the most well-known military operation on Dutch soil. I'm talking about Operation Market Garden. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery presented his operation plans to Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower. This plan, Operation Market Garden, consisted of capturing the bridges across the main Dutch rivers, here, in order to liberate Eindhoven, Nijmegen and Arnhem, and therefore circumvent the German Siegfried Line, which was located here, so that the Allies could push into the heart of Germany after they were successful. Montgomery believed that the war would be over before Christmas. It didn't. What went wrong? Operation Market Garden consisted of an airborne attack by the British, American and Polish paratroopers. Their mission was to capture a series of bridges across two channels, the rivers Maas, Waal and Rhine. The drop zones of these airborne forces were too far from their objectives. Also, the radio communication failed and the SS Panzer Corps that was stationed near Arnhem reacted much quicker than anticipated. The Allies fought brave, but were soon isolated and had to pull back. The Allies lost 15,000 men, of which 6,000 captured, half of them were wounded. Yet, Operation Market Garden wasn't a complete failure since Eindhoven and Nijmegen were liberated. In order to secure the Allies salient, as you can see here, the Allies moved east in order to capture Overloon and Venray, and this led to the Battle of Overloon. Here, the Allies suffered 2,000 deaths and lost many tanks, yet they proclaimed victory. Following the victory, the Allies now moved west during Operation Pheasant, liberating Den Bosch, Tilburg, Breda, which is my family's town, and Roosendaal, which is my hometown. Breda was liberated by Polish forces. Roosendaal was liberated by the British Polar Bear Division. We still have a monument dedicated to those heroes. Therefore, the most of the province of Noord-Brabant was now liberated. The eastern parts, as well as the northeastern part of the province of Limburg, that were located east of the Meuse River, were liberated after the Battle of the Bulge in 1945. From early October, the Allies started perhaps the most grueling operation during the liberation of the Netherlands. And I'm talking about the Battle of the Scheldt, which was fought right here in the province of Zeeland. Why did this battle take place? Well, to explain that, we need to go to the Liberation of Belgium. Now, I mentioned that the city of Antwerp, located here in Belgium, was liberated early September. Now, the Allies, they had run into supply problems. However, the city of Antwerp had many ports, so therefore the Allies could resupply their troops. The thing is, the Germans were still in control of the Westerschelde, and across here there were coastal batteries, and in the water there were mines. So, however, the Allies had now the ports of Antwerp in their hands, they could not make use of it. So therefore, the province of Zeeland had to be liberated. Now, as you can see here on this map, and this was made this operation also very dreadful, is that the Germans had inundated, flooded many parts of Zeeland. So this made the Allied advance very hard. The Battle of the Scheldt consisted of 4 operations. Operation 1. The access to Zuid-Beveland had to be secured. It led to heavy fighting on Hogerheide. October 13, 1944 is known as Black Friday for the Canadians that fought there, who suffered heavy losses. A few days later, the access to the province of Zeeland was secured. The second operation was named Operation Switchback, and the Allies needed to secure the German bridgehead Breskens. The Breskens pocket was defended by 10,000 heavily entrenched German armed with heavy machine guns and mortars that were ordered to hold out till the last man and were located behind the Leopold Channel. The Canadians made slow progress. An amphibious attack at Hoofdplaat on the 9th of October came as a surprise to the Germans, yet they managed to hold out till early November. Stiff German resistance and the hard terrain made this operation a grueling one. Operation 3 was named Operation Vitality, which started at the end of October and consisted of capturing Zuid-Beveland. The attackers were once again hindered by the terrain, which made use of armored units very ineffective. Over land and via amphibious attacks, the Canadians managed to capture Zuid-Beveland. And Operation 4 consisted of the conquest of Walsim Island. This island, which also played an important role during the Battle of Zeeland in May 1940, was a true German fortress. The Allies came up with a destructive plan, destroyed the dikes and let the island flood. More than 150 Dutch civilians died in the raid of Westkapelle. Amphibious landings here and at Vlissingen, as well as an attack at Sloedam, secured the island. Also, Dutch special forces that were trained by the British took part in this operation. November 8, 1944, the Battle of the Scheldt was over. The Allies had suffered 130,000 4,000 losses. In October 1944, the Germans also established the Volkssturm. Now, I've talked about the Volkssturm in great detail in another video, links are in the description, but just a quick recap about this army formation. The Volkssturm was a last-ditch army that consisted of men that weren't conscripted yet between the age of 16 and 60. There was a severe lack of uniforms and weaponry. Therefore, most soldiers of the Volkssturm fought in civilian clothing and were provided with just an armband. As for weaponry, old weapons from World War I, as well as captured rifles, French, Dutch, Italian, you name it, as well as new simply manufactured weapons like the Panzerfaust and the Volkssturm guerre were used. The main attack on Germany was launched in 1945. However, in October 1944, the Allies managed to get a foothold on German territory by the conquest of the city of Aachen. Now, this was not an easy battle because Aachen was defended by members of the SS, the Volkssturm, the Hitler Youth, and they were willing to fight till the last man. The Americans suffered 5,000 casualties. House-to-house fighting continued pitilessly during October. Starting at the top of a house, the Americans blasted their way through to the next building using a bazooka. It was too dangerous to try the street. The 30th Division suffered such a high rate of casualties that a replacement private who arrived at the start of the battle found himself a sergeant in charge of a platoon 3 weeks later. In order to reach the Ruhr dams, the Allies had to cross through a forest called Hürtgen Forest. Now, I talked about the Battle of Aachen, and if you think that that was bad, hear me out on a battle that became known as America's meat grinder. From September to December, the Allies fought in the Battle of Hürtgen Forest, which was another grueling experience and even worse than Aachen. This forest was extremely rough terrain. The pine tree forestry combined with ravines made it impossible for tanks to cross. The Germans were heavily entrenched and placed booby traps of all sorts. On top of that, it was raining continuously and soon American troops were plagued by sickness, psychological exhaustion and even desertion. 1 out of 4 Americans sent in became a casualty, which brings the total of American losses to 33,000. The battle ended with a German victory, and after this, the Ardennes offensive was undertaken. Hitler's plan was to push through the Ardennes again, and this time head for Antwerp, therefore deliver the Allies a fatal blow. Now, British commander Montgomery argued that the Germans weren't able to perform such counterattacks. Except they did. The Allied troops that were stationed in the Ardennes, which is a forestry region in the southeast of Belgium, which also overlaps a part in France and Luxembourg, suffering from boredom and basically killed time by hunting wild boars. But then, on December 16, 2,000 German artillery guns opened fire on the Allied positions in the Ardennes. The soldiers were in shock and awe. They did not see this coming. Because of the German bombardment, the Allied field telephone cables were cut and communications broke down. Also, German paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines, which caused great confusion, and on top of that, Germans dressed in American uniforms, driving American vehicles, tried to push through to reach the Meuse River and secure the bridges. Now, although most of these units were captured in time and weren't able to reach their objective, it caused great panic and confusion among the Allies. When American commander Omar Bradley rushed into his HQ and spotted the red arrows on the map indicating the German attacks, he sat in disbelief. Where the hell has this son of a bitch gotten all his strength? The 6th SS Panzer and 5th and 7th Panzer Division moved forward. The north of Luxembourg came under German control again. American units became surrounded and had to surrender. SS units led by Obersturmbannführer Joachim Peiper massacred 86 of them at Malmedy. Also, civilians that were accused of sheltering Americans were killed. The SS attackers were stopped by the American 2nd and 99th Infantry Division. Further south, the Germans made a bigger breakthrough and headed for Bastogne. This city became encircled by German troops. The Allied troops stationed there tried to hold out the best they could. Some were still wearing summer uniforms and suffered tremendously of the cold. Yet they held their lines. By the time the Germans attacked at the Ardennes mid-December, the Allies had already pushed to the south of the Netherlands, and my grandma, who lived in the southern city of Sittard, remembered how Americans were stationed in their living room. And one day she came down and she saw that all the American soldiers had disappeared. They had been called to the Ardennes. Over the course of the month, the weather shifted in favor of the Allies. With clear skies, elite planes could easily spot the German columns and destroy them. Hitler stubbornly refused to call off the attack. Now, in January, the German Luftwaffe carried out a large-scale air attack. They destroyed 150 Allied planes, but lost 300 themselves. The Allies were able to replace their plane losses. The Germans not. Also, the German panzers had run out of fuel. And this was because of the fact that the Germans had lost the Romanian oil fields, as well as that they weren't successful in capturing the oil fields in the Caucasus during Fall Blau, or Case Blue, in the Soviet Union. Some historians say that the lack of oil was the main reason why the Germans lost the Second World War. What do you think? Leave your comment down below. The suffering for the Belgian population was not over, because from German bases, the Germans launched V1 and V2 rockets on the Belgian cities of Antwerp and Liège, causing into civilian casualties. Also, the SS units of Obersturmbannführer Peiper killed off many Belgian civilians to vent their fury because they failed to reach their objective of capturing the bridges of the Meuse River. Altogether, around 3,000 Belgian civilians died during this offensive. Some at the hands of the SS units, but most of them got victim in the Allied bombing campaigns. The Ardennes offensive constituted a major defeat for the Germans. They lost half their tanks and guns and suffered heavy casualties, with 12,652 killed, 38,600 wounded, and 30,000 missing, most of whom were taken prisoner. The Americans in the Battle of Attrition lost 10,276 men killed, 48,493 wounded, and 23,218 missing. The failure of Operation Market Garden had horrifying results. For those living in the western part of the country, I'm talking about this part. As historian Anthony Beaver wrote, the Dutch north of the River Maas would remain under German control until the end of the war, in the grip of famine exacerbated by their occupiers. When railwaymen went on strike to help the Allies at the time of Operation Market Garden, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Austrian who headed the Reichskommissariat Niederlande, stopped the import of any food as a reprisal. The population was reduced to eating tulip bulbs and any sugar beets which the Germans had not taken. Children were paralyzed by rickets, and malnutrition exposed everyone to disease, especially typhoid and diphtheria. Around 20,000 Dutchmen would die during this Dutch famine, also known as the Hongerwinter or the Hunger Winter. The west of the country would remain under German control till the 5th of May. The Rhineland Campaign started, and this consisted of several operations. Operation Veritable. The British launched an attack from Nijmegen into Germany, through the Hürtgen Forest and encountered heavy defenses. The British broke through but suffered heavy losses. Upon entering the German city of Kleve, they had huge difficulties moving forward since the town had been smashed by Allied bombers and the ruins proved an ideal cover for German defenders. Operation Grenade was carried out by American troops and was severely delayed because the Germans had destroyed the dam which caused flooding. In March, the Allies achieved their goal. Further south, Operation Lumberjack was carried out by the Americans. During the Battle of Remagen, the Allies managed to secure the intact Ludendorff Bridge across the Rhine River. Now, the bridge would collapse later that month, however, but it gave the Allies a foothold across the Rhine River. Once the Allies had crossed the Rhine River, there were barely any natural defenses to hinder the Allies. Across the Rhine River, the Germans had 60 divisions. Well, on paper, because in reality, it was just half of that strength. Wehrmacht troops surrendered in droves as soon as the Americans appeared. SS units fought on more fanatical, however, they lacked supplies. As an SS officer wrote on the 2nd of April, Düsseldorf lost, Cologne lost, the disastrous bridgehead at Remagen. In the southeast, the Bolsheviks have reached Wiener Neustadt. Blow upon blow, we are coming to the end. Do our leaders see perhaps a possibility? Does the death of our soldiers, the destruction of our cities and the villages make any sense now? The German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, was as good as dead. There was lack of fuel, lack of planes, and the German airfields were bombed systematically. In the north, the armies of Montgomery crossed the Rhine River at Wesel. Now, take a look at this picture of Wesel, or what is left of it. It is insane. It reminds us of the First World War. The destruction is immense. In the middle, at Remagen, the troops led by Omar Bradley crossed the Rhine River and marched off east. Another army went to the south of Germany to the Alpine fortress because, according to speculative intelligence, Hitler was there trying to fight till the bitter end. Well, this wasn't the case because Hitler was in Berlin. The Allied troops pushed into the north of the Netherlands via Germany. French paratroopers were dropped in Drenthe and the Allies liberated one town after another. The last big battle was fought in the city of Groningen. German units fought alongside Dutch and Belgian SS troops. Because of the narrow streets, house-to-house fighting followed. It left the old city center largely in ruins. At the end of March, the Allies captured Frankfurt. Now, when I say the Allies captured this German city or that German city, I obviously mean what was left of it, because the German cities had been bombed continuously by the Allies and had barely any buildings left standing. These bombing campaigns had questionable military significance. Was it really necessary? Well, if you have any thoughts about that, feel free to leave them down below. Most of the German cities were liberated after small-scale fighting. The Allies also liberated their first concentration camps. Skeletal figures surrounded by unburied corpses showed the horrors of the Nazi regime. The Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland of Germany, was not attacked right away, but surrounded by the Allies. German Army Group B, led by Walter Model, was encircled early April. The Ruhr pocket was dissolved mid-April, and the Allies took over 300,000 prisoners. Commanding officer Walter Model, he wandered off into the forest, he took his pistol and shot himself. Around that time, the Americans reached Magdeburg at the Elbe. Now, from there, they did not launch an attack on Berlin. Here's what Anthony Beaver has to say about it. The capture of Berlin might cause 100,000 casualties, an estimate he, Eisenhower, later admitted to have been far too high. They both agreed that heavy casualties were an unacceptable price to pay, from which they would have to withdraw anyway when the fighting finished. The Allies took Dortmund, Nuremberg, Lippach, Düsseldorf, Stuttgart, Hamburg and München. Here and there, bitter fighting took place to capture the city. Now some Germans were willing to fight till the death, but most of them knew that the end was nigh. In many villages, the citizens hung out white sheets to welcome the Allies, and German soldiers surrendered one after another. On April 25, 1945, near the German town of Torgau, the Allied and Soviet troops met each other. A few days later, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. Now this here was not the end of World War II in Europe, because command passed on to Karl Dönitz, who finally signed the unconditional surrender on May 8th, 1945. Here's another story to be told, but that is what I'm gonna leave for another video. The 8th of May 1945 is known as VE Day, Victory in Europe. The Second World War that started in this continent was now over. Now if you want to know more about why Germany kept fighting the Second World War, well, it was more than clear that it was a lost cause. Click right here. Now consider becoming a patron, because with your donations I can make better, cooler and more awesome content for you. Thank you so much for watching. See you later.